if you've been paying attention to the narratives around impeachment over the past couple weeks, you'll know that some Democrats are beginning to become a little bit worried about whether or not the American public is really paying attention to the issue of impeachment. Specifically, they are worried about those independent and moderate voters in swing states and whether or not they care about impeachment. Are they tuning into the hearings, et cetera, et cetera. Fortunately, there is a new YouGov poll asking the American public just those kinds of questions. So let's take a look at the poll. So the first question here, basically, do you think it happened? Do you think that Donald Trump actually did this thing where he is trying to withhold military aid from Ukraine in order to get the president to investigate allegations of corruption? 48% of the population saying, yes, I do believe that this is something which happened. 35% saying no, and quite predictably, it generally breaks down along partisan lines, with 84% of Democrats saying, yes, I think that it happened. 7% saying no. And when it comes to independents, 40% and then 33%. And then, of course, Republicans overwhelmingly saying, no, I do not believe that it happened. Now, the next question here, if it is proven that, in fact, this did happen, do you believe that this is an impeachable offense? And this is actually really interesting and simultaneously not surprising at all. Essentially, what we see from these numbers here, 84% and 8%, 40, 33, 11, 77, basically compare it to these numbers here. Do you think that it happened, and whether or not you believe that it is an impeachable offense are essentially the same in the minds of voters. An interesting insight into into human nature, if there ever was one, even if it's not particularly surprising. But I think that what that probably means is that, when it comes to the impeachment hearings, it's not really going to matter. We're not talking about facts at this point, right? Like, whether, your ability to present really compelling evidence over whether or not this happened on the Democratic side is not going to be the main issue. Now, there may still be narratives that they can run with, but running on just presenting the facts likely is not going to be particularly persuasive to a lot of voters, considering that, whether or not you think it happened, it seems to be, in the minds of voters, the same question of whether or not you believe that it is an impeachable offense. Now, of course, though, that's probably just a question of ideological filtering. But in any case, so the next question here, and this is going to be really relevant to whether or not we're going to be able to persuade any of the voters, is, how interested are you in the hearing? Are you very interested, somewhat interested, and not very interested? I find it particularly interesting that essentially it breaks down into thirds, 32% saying, yes, I'm interested, 34 and 34 saying they are either somewhat interested or not interested at all. And interestingly enough here, it breaks down less so along party lines, but still somewhat along party lines, with 51% of Democrats saying that they are very interested and 14% saying they are not interested at all, and 21% of Republicans saying they are very interested and 46% saying they are not interested at all. Now, what I do think is an interesting point in this poll, the fact that it's roughly the same, those saying that they are somewhat interested across party identification. So 35% of Democrats, 34% of independents, and 33% of Republicans saying they are somewhat interested. Where the numbers seem to vary is whether or not you are very interested or not interested at all. This implies, although we have, we might be able to reasonably speculate from this, that what this suggests is that those who are saying that they are either very interested or not interested at all are likely very politically active, or at the very least already have an opinion. And so they're really interested, or they're not at all interested, like they already know ahead of time. And those who are somewhat interested, they may not have an opinion, or they're not particularly interested in politics, either or. So that's, I think, pretty relevant for this discussion, whether or not the Democrats are going to be able to leverage the impeachment hearings in order to, successfully persuade anyone. So do you plan on watching the hearings? And I think here we have a not particularly surprising story, 34% saying yes, and then 41% saying no, I don't plan on watching them at all, and 24% saying they're not sure. This right here is not a good number, just keeping it real. This is not a good number for Democrats, saying that 41% are saying straight up, no, I'm not going to watch any. You can do whatever you want, put a clown show, which I'm sure they will do. Anyway, do whatever you want, and I'm just not simply going to watch it. That is not good news for the Democrats if they think that their hearings are going to be successful in persuading voters. And it generally, this right here though is the really bad news. When you look at independents here, 46% of independents saying no, I am not interested in watching the hearings, like ahead of time, prima facie. They're absolutely like, I'm not going to watch it. Now, 53% Democrats saying yes, and then 25% saying no. On when it comes to Republicans, 55% saying no. So what we're seeing, the trend that we're beginning to starting to see here, is that independents are are closer to the Republicans than they are to the Democrats, at least on the issue of impeachment. The numbers just seem to be a little bit closer to the Republican numbers than they do seem to be to the Democrats. Just in general, that's a trend that we're starting to see in this poll, and that is not particularly good news for the Democrats. It does not mean, I want to be very clear, it does not mean that this is, sort of insurmountable barrier for Democrats, but it definitely looks like it is going to be quite a bit of an uphill battle for them. And this is just a question on how much of the hearing do you plan on watching. I don't think that's like a particularly great question, simply because like, how are you going to really know? I think that the question of whether or not you're interested in watching it is a much more relevant question. Anyway, so the question here, and I'll be sure, if you are curious in looking at those numbers, I will make sure that I do post this post this link down in the description so you can check it out, read through the whole thing for yourself. And by the way, the questions are not just actually about impeachment. I'm only going through the impeachment questions, but it's actually quite a big poll with lots of other great and very interesting information. So you very well may want to check that out after you finish watching this video, of course. So do you approve or disapprove of Donald Trump refusing to cooperate with the impeachment inquiry by refusing to provide requested documents? And basically 24% of people saying that they approve, and 24% saying they strongly approve, and 39%, nearly 40% saying they strongly disapprove. I think that this actually could be a relevant issue if you can really make it look like Donald Trump is not cooperating with it. I think that that is something which could persuade more moderate and independent voters. So I do think that this is going to be an issue which you're going to hear Democrats kind of harping on, because it could be an area where, independents are more likely to be like, hey, look, at least cooperate with the impeachment. And that's more or less what you see here in the numbers. Now, this is an exception to the whole thing, where independents are closer to the Republicans, because 31% here are saying, hey, look, I strongly disapprove of that. And then, of course, nearly 20% are saying that they strongly approve, but still more independents here are saying, hey, look, you should cooperate, basically. So that, I think, is going to be an important thing for Democrats to be bringing up. And I think that that will be a successful thing to bring up as well. So finally, let's look at the the real question here. Do you think the U.S. House of Representatives should or should not impeach Donald Trump? Right here, we have 45% of the American public saying yes, we should impeach, with 39% saying no. Those are generally, it leans towards impeachment, but they are definitely not the numbers that Democrats are going to need, especially considering, you look at the breakdown of the states. Democrats generally need to have a larger majority in order to have, I can't remember the exact number, but Democrats need to win a very, very high percentage of the popular vote in order to win the House, and of course, an even further number in order to win the Senate. So these numbers are not really what Democrats are going to need in order to successfully remove him from office. However, given that the House is controlled by Democrats, these numbers are probably good enough in order to have the political power in order to at least initiate that impeachment. So, but in any case, let's look at it by ideology. As you might expect, 86% of Republicans saying that they should not impeach, 84% of Democrats saying that they should, and then independents here really split. 37% of independents saying they should impeach and 37% saying that they should not impeach. So clear breakdown. So it does look like, you could shift them either way in terms of, for independents. It's really going to depend. It's really going to depend on how you can get the narrative out there. Again, I think that the narrative that Democrats should be moving with is Republicans and Donald Trump are not cooperating with the impeachment. I think that that will be a much more successful narrative than the narrative of look at this stuff of Ukraine. The average American, quite frankly, doesn't really care about sending military aid to Ukraine. It's not really something that's on the top of the average voter's mind. So really focusing on, hey, look, Republicans aren't even cooperating. Donald Trump isn't cooperating. That's something which I do think that will resonate with independents much more than just talking about military aid to Ukraine. Now, last question we're going to look at here for this video: should we remove Donald Trump from office? So let's say that the impeachment is successful. Should the U.S. Senate then remove him from office? Fairly similar numbers from the question of should he be impeached. Unsurprisingly, 47% of people, so slightly more here, are saying, look, if he is impeached, I do think that he should be removed from office. But 2%, is it really? Anyway, and 40%, so 1% more there, saying that they should not remove him from office. So slightly more, I suppose we might say a little bit more of a polarizing question, although those numbers are really close, so probably don't want to read too much into it. And fairly similarly, here we see Democrats and Republicans. What's interesting is slightly more independents, because you'll remember it was 37 and 37 for the question of should impeach or not impeach. But a slight tick up here in terms of independent voters, where now 40% of independents are saying, yes, if he's impeached, I do think that he should be removed from office, and 37% still saying that they should not remove him from office. So interesting data, interesting poll. I think that overall it's fairly favorable to Democrats, but not too favorable. I think it's an uphill battle. Impeachment is going to be, and this is unsurprising, is going to be an uphill battle for Democrats. Definitely going to be an uphill battle, but it does show a path forward. So to the naysayers saying that there's no hope, I don't see that in the poll. There's some hope in terms of at least being able to impeach and then not having serious political backlash. Whether or not they're actually going to be able to then remove from the Senate, that is, I think, very, very unlikely. How are you going to get so many Republicans to flip? That seems incredibly unlikely. But the numbers do seem to suggest that perhaps an impeachment is not a sort of political suicide. And quite frankly, that is really what the Democrats need in order right now to move forward on the issue of impeachment. And I think the polls seem to show that.